Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Dalt.
And what are we celebrating on this podcast, Coco? What big deal has just happened?
We're kind of a big deal.
Yes.
In case you didn't know, we celebrated just today 10,000 total downloads all time. As we said in our Twitter and Facebook posts commemorating the moment, that's a lot of downloads for one listener.
Way to go, listener. Thanks for doing that.
We appreciate you and all your support, listener.
And thanks for traveling the world, actually, and downloading from various countries. We also appreciate that because that's hard to do, and that shows dedication.
Maybe listener is like a KGB agent or something.
Oh, maybe. Oh, maybe that's why all the crime stuff we do is popular.
Oh,
because it's maybe listener is a killer.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah, on the lam from the law and is listening to us for yucks.
KGB agents tend to be down with the yucks.
They like the yucks. So, Coco, tell us what we're talking about today. Speaking of yucks.
And speaking of crime, so we are actually reviewing something for once that is not on Netflix. It's on Sundance now. It's a 3-part miniseries called Des, D-E-S. It's based on a true story of the Scottish serial killer Dennis Nilsen, whose nickname is Des. Mm-hmm. He admitted to killing 15 or 16 young men in London between like 1978 and 1983. I believe the cops only know 8 of their names, and they could actually only pin 12 or 13 on him. Mm-hmm. So he was played by David Tennant, mm-hmm. and he got busted in 1983, went to trial, found guilty of murdering all those guys. Spoiler. This miniseries was based on the book Killing for Company, which is by a guy named Brian Masters, who's sort of, it seems like a British Truman Capote, who visited Des in jail and wrote the book about him. So, Daltz, what did you think of Des? So
I thought we were watching something about a designated driver, like a guy who goes to a bar and just drives his friends home. That's what I thought we were watching.
You're like, wait a minute, where's Kiefer Sutherland? I thought this was Designated Survivor.
Oh, look at you.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Des jokes there we could probably make.
Kiefer really looks like David Tennant these days.
that makeup that they do, or is that CGI? We're not sure.
That's crazy.
So the story picks up with David Tennant playing, as you mentioned, Coco, the killer, Nielsen. And the story starts in the first 5 minutes with him being arrested for these crimes. Like, it's almost right off the hop. Is it not, if I'm remembering correctly? Like, we don't have any setup. There's no guy walking to an apartment or they're having beers together and then they take him to the apartment. It's him getting arrested is essentially the main focus of the first part. And then we just go from there in terms of him admitting it, him giving details of the crimes.
The police investigation.
The detectives looking into it, the detectives trying to get confirmation of names and that sort of thing. So where I'm going with this is it's kind of a non-traditional true crime story, is that there are no flashbacks, there are no recreations of the murders or anything like that. You see some of the murder victims in pictures, but you don't actually meet them. You see some of the people, like in flashbacks, and you see some of the people who had crimes committed to them, like they were assaulted and that sort of thing, but you don't really have a sense of who these people are, who the victims were, which I thought was fascinating in that. So this being a British production, obviously, and on Sundance now, I was fascinated by the way that this was not obviously an American production. So this was the color was drab, the scenery was not fantastic. The costumes were very much of the period, which of the late 70s, early 80s, so they looked like they were of that time. But it was very subdued. There wasn't a lot of action, per se. There wasn't a lot of pursuit of the criminal.
No.
There weren't a lot of thrills in that. It was very cerebral. It's very similar to, in some ways, to the Criminal UK series that we watched, in that the dialogue drove it all the behind-the-scenes kind of things that you had to figure out what was going on in your own was a lot there, too. So I thought it was pretty amazing. I, in particular, loved David Tennant as the killer. I thought he was fantastic. I looked into it a little bit, and our research department got me some materials, and I looked at the actual killer, what he looked like, and David Tennant looked almost exactly like him.
It's scary.
It was pretty scary, and apparently his mannerisms were very good and very accurate. The accent that he had. So David Tennant is from Scotland. The killer was from Scotland as well. So there was one of the few times that David Tennant's actually been able to have a Scottish accent in something that he's done, and so that added another layer to it, to the authenticity. I just thought it was really good. It was 3 parts, like Coco said, and I could have done with more of this. So this is one of those instances where
wow,
they leave you wanting more, but this is the way it's supposed to be, right?
Dolph is not a fan of series. He's like, oh God, we don't need 6 or 8 or 10 parts. Let's just watch movies. And so this is surprising to hear him say that he would have taken more.
And this is, and when I say that, I don't mean I wanted 12 parts. You know, like where I'm going with this is I liked it so much that I wish it had continued. Now, that doesn't mean that it needed to continue. I don't think there were any holes here. I don't think there were any plots that were not explored that they should have. We didn't need any flashbacks. We didn't need any treatment of who he was as a kid or anything like that. Like, I think it all would have added to the story, sure, but I think the way that they presented it was really good. Daniel Mays was the lead detective in it, and we had watched him in White Lines, which I thought was very good, and also many parts. And he was in Rogue One, too, randomly.
Yeah, we just rewatched Rogue One this weekend, not at my insistence, and he has a bit part in Rogue One, and so we were shocked when he rolled onto the screen, and we were like, that guy's in White Lines and Des. Like,
it's
what?
that guy. And he's also in Line of Duty. So he's got some chops, and he also not a traditional, he wouldn't have been a Hollywood lead in this.
No, like, he's not a classically handsome leading man.
He's just a very good actor, which I think is the way it should be. And he did a really good job of looking tortured over these, these deaths of these kids and young men.
Europeans do world weary really well. We've said that before, but
he did a great job. So I've rambled on and on. I thought it was pretty good. But before I add more, Coco, what did you think?
Well, I also enjoyed it. I wish, like, David Tennant was great because David Tennant is great in everything he does. And I realized this wasn't his call. This is who he was portraying. But I really wish he just could have, like, cut loose for a few scenes and just chewed the scenery. Like,
oh, yeah.
I understand Dennis Nilsen is much different from Ted Bundy and not one who would be prone to, like, courtroom histrionics.
Right.
So this isn't a part that, he's going to be able to sink his teeth into from, like, an over-the-top perspective. But at the very end of the first episode, he's talking to the guy who plays Brian Masters, and I believe. And I don't remember exactly what they're talking about, but the entire rest of the episode, like when he got arrested and when he's at the police station, and it reminded me of his, like, the first, like, 5 to 8 minutes of him in the first episode of the first season of Criminal UK. Like, he was also a suspect. He's in the interrogation room. The cops are asking him questions, and he's just sitting there and he's just like, no comment. No comment. That's all he says for the first 5 to 8 minutes. He's just very dispassionate. And that was the same in the first part of the first episode of Des. He's describing, like, oh yeah, well, I cut his head off and I boiled it and then I put his remains under the floorboards. But he's just so dispassionate. There's just nothing, it's like he's talking about, like, yeah, I walked my dog down to the corner and I picked up, like, a newspaper and a pack of smokes and then I went back home. Like, there's just nothing there. But then at the very end of the first episode, he's talking to the guy who plays Brian Masters, and the mask slips and you can see, like, the cruelty and the malice. And I was just, like, enthralled. I was like, oh my God, I wish I could watch the next 2 episodes right now. This is amazing. But then for the next 2 episodes, he kind of went back to not completely dispassionate, because there were times when he would get kind of agitated a little bit, but there wasn't that mask slip moment where you could see the cruelty and the malice. And I was disappointed in that. But like I said, this is not a character who's prone to courtroom histrionics and tantrums and throwing things. Like, that's who this person was. So that's how this has to be played. Like, he's still kind of an enigma in,
Well, I think this is almost like the perfect British serial killer. Like, this guy is so reserved and so quiet, and in some ways, he's holding everything back in the great British tradition. Don't express your emotions. Don't be forceful. Don't do
Stiff upper lip.
Yeah, stiff upper lip. Don't do anything in public that you don't want people to see and all that sort of stuff. And I think it epitomized that. It was just fantastic.
And we say this having not read Killing for Company, because I did look into trying to get it like on Amazon, like even just Kindle, and apparently it's not available anymore.
Oh, really? Out of print.
Yeah, so I would have been very interested in reading it just to get more background on. Although I will say, if you want to go to Wikipedia, I understand that Wikipedia is not, in many cases, completely accurate about a lot of things, but they do have a very kind of comprehensive entry on Dennis Nilsen. So if you're interested in learning more about like his background and his childhood and stuff, you can check out the wiki. But
I thought it was very interesting the way they did that. I liked that about it, actually. That was part of the appeal to me, is that we didn't have the table being flipped, because it was the tension that you were going to have the table be flipped. It was like, when are we going to learn that this guy is completely out of his mind? And when are we going to learn how cruel he is? And as one of the reviews I read from the New York Times, I said this was more about the how more about the why than the how, which a lot of these things, it goes in and it shows the guy with the hacksaw and the arm bone and stuff like that. Whereas we didn't have any of that. We just had our imagination. And even when they were digging up the bodies in the one backyard of the flat that he was staying at, we didn't get a lot of graphic, details on that. And it was just kind of a tent, and there were lights shine on it, and they were sifting the soil. We didn't have this discovery moment where somebody holds up a femur and they're like, I've got it, and then somebody grabs it and puts it in a bag and runs, to the lorry and takes off to the station and all that. We didn't have that kind of drama. It was just like everyday detective work, and I thought that was authentic. I like that kind of thing. And again, citing Criminal UK ad nauseum here, but it just that's real world stuff. You like guys doing shootouts in the street and sliding their cars and car chases across avenues and stuff like that. That's not really what happens in real. It happens, but not to the extent that you think it does when you watch a movie and you get that perception.
Right, like you watch crime documentaries and you see how they painstakingly put together a case that the suspect wasn't standing there with a smoking gun.
Right.
And you're like, wow, that is mind-numbingly
tedious.
Yeah. That's a lot of paperwork that, like, oh my God, I don't know if I'd want to do that, Well, if I could stand the dead bodies.
And the part about this too is that there were a lot of those details too. There are a lot of like, well, we have to really nail this down, because one of the tipping points in this whole case was he admits to killing so many people, but we didn't have any names. So there was no attachment to those names. And so they had to attach the names to the victims.
And that was a thing. Dalt suggested that maybe it was, a pre-DNA.
Of the time, yeah.
Of the time, like you have to have a name. But like here in the States, you don't need a name. If you've got a body, you've got John Doe number 1. And he's got like, John Does 1 through 8 or whatever. So I'm like, why do they need a name to charge this guy when they've got like all these dead bodies, cut up in his cabinet and buried in his backyard? So I don't understand if that's like a quirk of the British system or.
And that was part of it that was interesting to me, is that they were trying so desperately to identify these guys. I mean, obviously you need to identify them for the families and all the good reasons there, but to attach it to the crime itself, to attach those names to the crime themselves, that was fascinating to me. It was for that very reason. It's like, why wouldn't you just, the guy's admitting to doing it, you've got the bodies, you've got the evidence, because the big thing here in the States is if you don't have a body, then it's harder to charge for the crime. In this case, it's if you don't have the name to go with the body, then you can't connect it. And that was interesting to me, because that was a focus that you don't have anymore, because you have DNA and you have forensics that are much more advanced than they were in those days, obviously.
And it did, at the end, it flashed up and it said in 2008, DNA was able to give one of his unidentified victims a name. Right. So we have like 8 names now, as opposed to 7 names and then like 5 unidentified bodies. Yeah. So.
And that was it was a case I had known nothing about. I knew nothing about before we watched this.
That's another thing too. I'd never heard of this guy. I have lived in London and I've spent a bit of time in the UK. So I've heard of British serial killers, and not just Jack the Ripper, funny guy, but like the Moors murderers, and even like that kid who killed another kid in like 1997 in Manchester. Like, so I've heard of British killers before, but I've never heard anything about this guy. So I don't know.
And there are British killers.
And there are British killers. And he just died a few years ago, too.
In 2018.
In prison. So I don't remember hearing anything about that when he died. Like, nothing. So I don't know if it's... I don't know what's up with that. But he's definitely not somebody who... Like, here in the States, like, freaking everybody knows Ted Bundy. Everybody knows Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, you know the serial killers. And...
Well, it's like, the celebration of violence that doesn't necessarily happen in the UK or other countries around the world compared to the United States. And that's funny because we watched the Ted Bundy movie with our buddy Zac Efron.
Zac Efron.
The other day. And it was very much we didn't do it intentionally, but it was very much a study in contrasts in that you've got the Ted Bundy, handsome guy, giving interviews all the time to the TV in those days. And the women were swooning and they were coming to the trial and all these sort of really reprehensible things. But he was a savage guy too. Like he was just as bad as this guy. And yet he was not necessarily celebrated by the media. He was interviewed and people were clamoring for information about him. So therefore the media was giving him to him. But he was no different or no better than this guy. But we know all sorts of things about Ted Bundy. How many movies have been made about Ted Bundy?
Right.
We watched the documentary. We watched the movie with our bro Zach. There was another series that you were talking about in terms of the woman that he married. There's all sorts of these kinds of depictions, and yet we've got this one series on Des, and this guy did some horrific things.
Yeah, if you read the Wikipedia entry on him, they didn't really go into on the series like a lot of what he did with, I mean, you know, obviously they talked about cutting him up, but there was some other stuff that he did with the bodies, and they didn't even like talk about that. I think he would have been just as big a fame whore as Ted Bundy if he had been given the opportunity, because he did have like clippings of himself like hung up in his jail cell and stuff. So I think he would have like courted the media attention if he could have, but I think they locked it down a whole lot better than
and I think he also was sitting down to have the book written about him.
Right.
So he did the best he could, I think, in those times. He was like, I want somebody to write a book about all this. And he was very careful to document everything he had done. And he had diagrams in these notebooks and everything, like things that he, obviously, there was some sort of, narcissism going on here with him in a lot of ways, and that he wanted all the attention to be spent on him. And then when the book was written, and Brian Masters said, I wrote it on a cautionary tale or whatever it was. And then he got really Nilsen got really upset that the book was not strictly about his accomplishments and how twisted a guy he was, or his legacy or what have you. So I thought that was very interesting. It was very British. I liked it. I like, as I said to you, Coco, at one point, it's like, I like these foreign crime dramas because it's not just all, let's go out and shoot him, let's have a car chase. And like, it was all very nuanced and detail oriented, etc.
I will watch as much foreign crime as you want. Like, Netflix thinks that's all I want to watch anyways.
Well, that's all you want to watch.
So anytime, like, you just want to sit down and pound out like an 8-part Norwegian noir thing, like, I'm there. Like, I live here, so you don't even have to text me and be like, hey,
let's get together.
Season 3 of Borgen, I'm here. So just, be like, sup.
What I'd like to see actually is a crime series starring the Swedish chef from The Muppets.
Oh my God.
Where he investigates crimes. Wouldn't that be great?
Or what if he's the killer?
Oh, he's the killer.
And Beaker is investigating the crimes. Beaker's doing the interrogating.
And so he's got the real hands. Yeah. The Swedish chef's got the real hands. He's got like the cleaver.
Yeah, totally.
And Beaker's like, murmur me, murmur. Under seeing the bargain.
That would be amazing.
I think, see, Netflix, call us.
Totally.
Drop us an email because we've got ideas.
Oh, no, wait. The Swedish chef is the Muppets. Yeah, so they'd be Disney Plus. So Disney Plus has to call us.
Right, you're right.
They just rebooted the Muppets. Didn't you try to watch that?
I tried to watch it. I made it through about 10 minutes of it.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah, it was not good.
Oh, I'm sorry. So any final thoughts on Des?
I recommend it. David Tennant, to me, has shot up in terms of where he stands in the acting world after seeing him in Criminal UK. I mean, I watched him in Doctor Who with my daughter many a time, and I thought he was fine. I mean, there's only so much you can do with that role. He didn't upset me, or I've seen a lot of Doctor Who in my time. I was like, I can't believe what he's doing with that role. Like he was good, but seeing him in Criminal UK was fantastic, and then seeing him again in this, he was this is Oscar territory that he's
wow.
He was just that good because he was so nuanced and he was so subtle, and you could see the crazy in him, like the way he's, I'm not just talking about the hair and the glasses.
Like, the very 80s, like oversized aviators.
Right, and the suit and everything like that. Like he that was all fine and good, but the way he sat, the way he looked, the way he lit his cigarette, and oh, by the way, this is not an anti-tobacco movie.
Oh my God, no! Everybody is smoking everywhere.
Oh man, I was getting secondhand smoke just watching this thing. I was thinking that we might have to open the windows when we were watching it.
It's the early '80s in England, so
wow, so much smoke.
Yeah,
but fantastic. David Tennant is worth the price of admission. Everybody else in this is really good. Like I said, David Mays was, as the lead detective, very good. I'm getting more appreciation for his acting talents. I thought in White Lines, pardon me, I thought he was fine. I thought he maybe was a little bit over the top a little bit, but now I'm getting more used to his style, and I think this was really good. I think he was really good. What did you think, Coco? What's I'm going to give it I don't know, 2 cadavers up or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you said David Tennant's in Oscar territory, I was like, wow, Dalt's has given it 2 cleavers up.
Yeah. He's fantastic in this. Every time he's on screen, I was riveted by his performance.
We need to watch Broadchurch.
We do.
I'm telling you.
We do.
Him and Olivia Colman, speaking of Oscar winners.
Wow.
Yeah, can't beat that.
So what'd you think?
So I enjoyed it. I will say he was clearly begging to get caught because he flushed bones and organs down his toilet.
Right.
I lose one hair on my head down the bathroom sink, and that thing is stopped up for like a week. And this guy is flushing bones and organs down a toilet. Like, the plumbing was going to go eventually. Yeah. So he was just begging to get caught.
Yeah.
Another reason to think that, this guy was probably a fame whore, like dying to be a fame whore. But,
narcissist.
I enjoyed it. I wish David Tennant could have had a couple more meaty scenes, but like I said, that's just not who this person is.
Right.
He did what he did with the character very, very well. I really enjoyed it. I will watch David Tennant in anything. I love him. He's fantastic. Daniel Mays?
Daniel Mays, yeah.
Daniel Mays? Yeah, he was...
Did I say David Mays earlier?
Is it David or is it Daniel?
No, I just think it's Daniel.
Oh, okay. Whoever he is, the Rogue One and White Lines
Daniel
guy.
Mays, yeah.
Daniel Mays. He was really, really good as well. He, there's this one... Like, you knew he was going to say it, but it still got you. Like, at the very end, when he and Brian Masters are in Dez's apartment, and Brian Masters was just like, oh, I don't know how they're going to be able to rent this out because of the smell of all the bodies. And Daniel Mays was like, yeah, I don't smell it anymore. And, like, you knew he was going to say it, but when he said it, the way he said it, you were just like, oh, man, that is brutal. So, the entire cast was great.
Yeah.
The supporting cast was great. David Tennant was great. Whoever played Brian Masters was maybe a little bit on the hammy side for me initially, but I thought as the series went on, he kind of...
Jason Watkins of The Crown.
He eased into sort of like the weight of what it was he was doing. And it said at the very end that in real life, Brian Masters visited Dennis Nilsen in prison for like another 10 years.
Yeah.
And that was like the only guy who visited him. Like, Des didn't call a priest or anything.
Right.
Like, it was just his biographer. So, yeah, I'd give it like... in the B+ to A- range, like right on that line.
So it sounds like I liked it more than you liked it.
I liked it, but yeah, I mean, if you're giving it 2 cleavers up, then you liked it more than I did.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a strong performance lifts all boats. And I thought that David Tennant's performance in this was just so good that he brought everybody else up. And like you said, Daniel Mays was great too. So I'm not underplaying his performance at all. But
Barry Ward was good too. We should give him a call out. He was also in White Lines.
Right.
So
yeah, but I think that the story, I love the fact that this was subtle. I love the fact that this was not a shoot 'em up. There wasn't gore, blood everywhere. It very easily could have been. And I like the fact that he didn't flip a table. And I like the the caged rage of all this was what I liked about it.
It's not Zac Efron as Ted Bundy, like shaking his finger in John Malkovich's face, like screaming about how he's been mistreated in prison, like
and jumping out a window and stuff like that. Yeah. So yeah, I think we're good.
All right, rock and roll. So if you want to add to our total of 10,000 downloads,
please do.
You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Ghana if you're in India, TuneIn, Google Play, iHeartRadio, IMDb, and now Amazon Music. We are very excited. Please find us on any of those platforms. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so others can find us as well. If you would like to find us on social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Coco and Daltz. If you want to shoot us an email, let us know what you think of this episode, what you want to hear us review in the future. We are at cocoanddaltz@gmail.com. And finally, you can find us on the interwebs at cocoanddaltz.com for reviews of things that we don't talk about on the podcast.
So thanks again, listener, for hitting us on the 10,000 downloads.
What?
We are a huge hit, and it's all because of you, so we appreciate that. So for another episode of the podcast, stay tuned for what we got coming up next. It's going to be big, I'm telling you. I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Daltz.